Welcome to the CBIA BizCast. I'm your host, Ali Warshavsky, and today on our podcast, we are speaking with Governor Ned Lamont. It's Manufacturing Month, and the governor has been touring businesses throughout the state. We'll touch on that along with some questions that CBIA members want answers to. Governor, welcome to the podcast.
Ali, how are you?
I'm doing well. It is Manufacturing Month, and we've seen you go through a lot of Connecticut businesses, but people might not know that you come from the private sector. What's your background in the private sector and business?
Yeah, I worked for a cable TV operator right out of business school, and then I started up my own at that point, cable company. Then it became a wireless IT company. We specialized in universities, had service going to about 1 million students in 40 states, delivering high-speed data, video, and a little bit of voice.
And you decided to make the jump, of course, and now you're governor, and you've been touring the state for Manufacturing Month, going to all these businesses, but we've noticed a Made in Connecticut series. And what is the goal of that, and what have you seen through these visits?
I've seen a state that was a manufacturing powerhouse going back 100 years, lost our way a little bit. Some of the manufacturing was going offshore back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and now it's coming back. And that was part of the story I wanted to tell. Connecticut's competitive with anybody. Manufacturing is more capital intensive, more IT intensive, more important to have the really best workforce. Those are all big advantages why what was going offshore is now coming back onshore. So I've made the best effort I could, going not just to the big guys, but also going to all the folks in the supply chain along the way, saying, why are you in Connecticut? What are the advantages of being in Connecticut? How can I help you stay and grow in Connecticut?
And I believe you said that your goal is to double the amount of manufacturers in the state in the next 10 years. How do you plan to do that?
I think it starts with where you have your natural advantages. Look what we do in terms of aerospace, submarines. Some of the most complex manufacturing in the world takes place here in Connecticut. Then, you talk to electric boat, a lot of their supply chains in South Carolina, some in China, how we can bring back some of that supply chain. We've learned, especially in this last few months, how supply chain is really important. Transportation costs are getting expensive. So if you're close to the end user, you're close to the manufacturer, that makes a big difference. So these are all reasons why we're trying to give people a reason why Connecticut is a natural place for you to grow and expand.
And the supply chain shortage, of course, has just been all over the news, and everything we've been hearing about has to relate to that, and also the labor shortage. We had our recent CBI survey that came out, and the labor shortage was cited as the #1 barrier to growth for member companies of CBIA in Connecticut, especially in the manufacturing industry. Are there other policy areas that need consideration to fix this issue?
I'm not even sure. Look, 3 years ago when I was running, we had a lot of advanced manufacturing jobs we couldn't fill because we weren't training people with the right skills. We've been fixing that, made a big effort in terms of upskilling with Colin Cooper, working very closely with the manufacturing industry, putting in place training programs at community colleges and beyond. You help provide the curriculum, we'll provide the funding you need to make that happen. But now, after 18, 20 months of COVID, we're finding it's not just a skilling issue. We're finding we have to continue to encourage people to get back to work. Some of them are, the restaurants and the service sector where people are just reluctant to get back to work. Obviously, wages are going up, getting a little more expensive, doing what we can to attract people. And I used to think maybe it's all public health related, but let's face it, Connecticut has the lowest infection, highest vaccination in the country. So we got to do a better job of convincing people now's the time to get back to work. The pay is good. It's a good starting job, or it's a good job at advanced manufacturing, which is a great career. And we're doing the outreach every day.
In terms of the manufacturing sector, do you think a lot of it is misconception of these dark warehouses and a trade that kids don't want to go into? How do you fix that misconception? We were touring Horse Engineering, and it's far from what I would have imagined when I was 12 going through school, what it is now. It's light, it's bright, there's IT section. It just is very different. Do you think we need to break that misconception?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially the parents have this old Charlie Chaplin version of manufacturing. It is so out of date. Go to Hartford, go to Stanley Black & Decker's manufacturing. You'll see it's extraordinary. The robots and delivery and the IT skills necessary to manage these incredibly complex pieces of equipment. And it's not just the big companies. As I go to a lot of the small manufacturers, it's incredible how precise this work is. Much more capital intensive, less labor intensive, better paid, cleaner conditions, and it takes some real strong IT skills to make it work.
Let's switch gears now, and we're going to talk about taxes. I'm sure that's your favorite subject to talk about. Do you support expanding the manufacturer apprentice tax credit to smaller manufacturers?
Yeah, I didn't think it was not eligible for smaller manufacturers. Look, to get back, Ali, to your last question, how do we show people how cool manufacturing is in the 21st century? One way is start earlier, start in our VOTEC schools, start even in our high schools, but then make sure you have an apprenticeship program so 17, 18-year-olds can see what it is all about. Those kids, once they get there, they tend to stay. And yeah, I'm talking with David Lamont, our amazing Commissioner of Economic Development, about a credit program. So we give local businesses an added incentive to take that apprentice, give them that opportunity, give them some of that training. Once they've seen your job, they're more likely to stay.
And last session, you were a critical voice in holding line against tax increases. Given the federal money coming to the state, do you believe now is the time to start providing some tax relief to small businesses?
I do. You got to be careful because we have a very volatile revenue stream in this state. And obviously, we're doing very well right now. We're paying down debt. We've had a surplus each of the last 2 years. But you can't take that for granted. So you got to be careful about adding on a lot of big new obligations if things change. Obviously, we have the biggest rainy day fund, so we're well prepared compared to a lot of our peers. But I do anything I can to help support local businesses, startup businesses, entrepreneurs. I was an entrepreneur myself. I know, what it's like when you meet that first payroll, what it's like when you have to watch your revenues coming in, see what your expenses are. Every dollar really matters. And I'm going to do everything I can as a former entrepreneur to make it easier for them to start and grow their businesses.
And since every dollar really matters, do you support repealing the state sales tax on worker training programs and on PPE and other safety apparel? Of course, PPE is something that some companies now have to invest in. They never really had to before.
I think, look, I didn't know we had a sales tax on worker training programs. I don't quite know what that is. I got to take a look at that. But again, and the PPE, it's not much. We're providing that. But yeah, I want to do everything I can to make it easier. I'll tell you as an aside, Ali, there was no stockpile of PPE down in Washington, D.C. That was a myth. So we now have an enormous stockpile. So we're ready and well prepared next time. I'll tell you an idea that I'm toying around with. You graduate from a Connecticut school, Connecticut Community College, Connecticut College. You take a job with a Connecticut manufacturer. You take a job with a Connecticut business. If they forgive your student loan, say after 3 years, like a vesting schedule, we'll give you a tax credit to help pay for some of that for you. It's an idea that we're working on in our team here. I love it because it gives young people an incentive to stay in Connecticut. It gives Connecticut employers an incentive to hire here in Connecticut. And to your original question, it's a tax cut for small business.
The corporate tax surcharge, why has it remained on the books for so long?
I think our corporate tax, we're about average. I don't think we're a lot more or less than other states. I think it's just one of the balances in terms of how you pay for things. I'll tell you, this is sort of interesting. I'll just get provocative here for your membership a little bit. Remember, the corporate income tax used to raise about 25, 26% of our state revenues. Today, it represents about 6% of our state revenues. So while the corporate income tax is really not paid by the big guys very much, it is disproportionately paid by the little guys. So that's one of the many reasons that I'm trying to do everything I can to help small business in terms of tax cuts.
And the capital base tax, why was the repeal of it delayed this year?
I think the capital base tax is something that we ought to be getting rid of or repealing. You're a small business. I was a small business. You don't have many revenues coming in. It's like sort of a minimum tax for small business. You know, it's a tax on that piece of equipment that I want you to have an incentive to get that piece of equipment. I don't want to disincent you from doing that. So that's something that's high on my list, is something I want to get rid of.
And do you support restoring the pass-through entity tax to its original level? Because the 2019 adjustment cost small businesses about $53 million annually.
Look, I'd like to get rid of all these things. There's a certain balance you have to have out there. Minority estates even offer that pass-through credit. We're one of the few that do. And the only question is, how big a credit is it? I think it went from 93% to 87% or something like that. But it's still a very significant credit. But it's something we're going to look at. The main thing I'd love to do is simplify the tax code. It is just too complicated. There are too many ins and outs. I talked to CBIA and the business community about that a few years ago, saying, look, I could have lowered the rate, expand the base, but expanding the base is pretty complicated. So it's a long-term discussion.
And let's talk about the 2022 agenda. We're planning ours, so I'm sure that means you're planning yours. What will your agenda focus on? Some key points.
Workforce. I don't have oil, I don't have gas, I don't have silicon, but we have the best trained workforce. I got to do everything I can that your members, folks looking at the state of Connecticut, the best trained workforce is the biggest strategic asset we have. That's why I've got over 100 million over the next couple of years, expanding workforce training at no cost to your members. That's why I like the idea of the apprenticeship program. That's why I like the idea about forgiving student loans. That's priority number one. Two, we have really good momentum in the state, and I want to keep that momentum. For the first time in decades, we have tens of thousands of young families moving to the state of Connecticut, net increase. And I want to keep that momentum going, and that means best schools in the country, good job opportunities, a startup culture, an entrepreneurial culture. That would be priority, number two. And finally, me, I'm always banging away at transportation. A degree to which I can take 15 minutes off your commute, either by road or by train, represents a big savings, opens a lot of our smaller towns to more opportunity. That plus broadband, which is sort of parallel to transportation, will really transform the state and turn our location into a big advantage.
I was going to ask you about transportation. As someone who lives in Fairfield County, takes 95 several times a week, it's something I'm very interested in. And if Congress passes the infrastructure bill, Connecticut receives about $5 billion. You mentioned trains, highways. What are some specific examples of what you plan to invest it in?
So first of all, on the highways, it's not a matter of needing another lane. It's a matter of those 3 or 4 or 5 choke points between, say, Stamford and New Haven that you blessedly get to drive 3 times a week. And if I can get a longer exit lane on there, I can get rid of those checkpoints, choke points, and probably save 10, 15 minutes off your commute in both directions. For rail, some of it is straightening out the tracks and signalization. A lot of it is these really old bridges. They're 90 years old and 100 years old. And the train slows over that bridge, then speeds up again. Those would be that. So I can take 10 minutes off that, commute from New Haven to Stamford, Stamford to New York, to each one. So those would be some of the priorities. But I got to work with my friends in the legislature, and I can use your help on this. Everybody says, yippee, you're getting all this free money from the federal government, $1 billion a year. We don't have to pay for anything. That's not quite right. There's a sort of 10, 20% copay on this. So that could be like $200 million a year we've got to put up in order to be eligible for our $1 billion. So we're still working on that, but we're going to be ready to take advantage of this. And I think you're going to see transportation really transformed over the next 5-10 years in this state.
I will time my commute and let you know in 5 years. That's for sure. I'll let you know if I can shave at least 10 minutes off while going the speed limit. Last serious question for you. The state's high cost of living has been a barrier to growth. What can be done to address that? We've been lucky to see an influx of New Yorkers coming in, but many of these were coming in from the city, from Westchester, where the cost of living was also high. How do we lower it so that more people can find Hartford and the surrounding areas a more attractive place to live and work?
Yeah. First of all, compared to our peers, we're holding the line. You know, you saw what New York, New Jersey did, raising income tax. We've held the line on income tax, so we're going to continue to hold the line on that. That's important. We've given additional support to our municipalities. That means they're holding the line or even reducing property taxes. But the cost of living here is a lot more than that. It's making education a lot more affordable. I think I described some of the initiatives we have there. Healthcare. I mean, last year we had the lowest increase in our health insurance costs we've ever had, less than 1%. This year is a little dodgier because of COVID, but still really working hard to hold down increases in pharmaceutical costs, hold down healthcare costs. We made public transportation free on weekends, just as an experiment this last summer. So we're trying to do a variety of things that make this state more affordable for people. And if you're a working family, you know, you're getting paid a little bit more just because there's a very tight labor market. So it's working on both sides. I hope we're making real progress there.
Well, those are the serious ones I have for you. Now we just have some lighter rapid fire questions. Yankees or Red Sox?
Oh man, now you're breaking my heart because I'm a Yankees fan and they disappeared a long time ago. The Red Sox are on fire.
I know, same. I feel your pain, but they got to have, you know, a good year every once in a while. They had a long stretch of bad years. So, all right, my last question. Are you planning on 4 more years in office, a run for 4 more years?
I think I've got to make up my mind on that pretty soon because everybody keeps asking me. But I tell you, Ali, I mean, I love governing. We've had a really complicated time this last 2 years. I thought I was elected as the first business guy in, you know, a couple of generations, helped get our jobs engine going again. We're making a pretty good progress on that front. Then COVID shut everything down. And fortunately, I think the state managed through COVID pretty effectively compared to our peers. So we're just getting things going again. So I love governing. I love taking care of business. I love, you know, working on a bipartisan basis with CBIA and Labor and Democrats and Republicans in the legislature, which is a long way of saying I put off that politics as long as I can. Well, thank you so much for coming on our podcast, and thanks for listening to this week's BizCast. You can listen and subscribe to our podcast on Apple, YouTube, and for more episodes, head to CBIA.com. See ya. Bye.